All right, good morning, everyone. It's 10 o'clock, so I'd like to go ahead and get started. My name is Will Hammond. I'm one of the hosts today. So thank you for joining us for PrecisionU 2021. This is part 2. Today we're going to be talking about fertilizer on the planter pass and how we can incorporate that. So when we're thinking as a producer in the springtime, we're getting this applications done, getting things ready to go and rolling into planning, there's a lot of challenges. So what kind of ideas or values do you guys see in transitioning to placing nutrients with the planter?
Well, I'll go ahead and start. It's an interesting conversation because if we're really honest about what's happening in the spring and the life of a farmer, I don't know if I want to add any complexity to what's going on. I've already got my hybrids I need to place. I'm dealing with challenging weather conditions, shrinking windows to get my crop in the field. I've got equipment, I've got labor. I have a lot of logistical things that have to get conquered in order for me to get a crop into the ground. And deep down, we really don't want to add any complexity to that. So if we think about the conversation of fertility on the planter pass, I now have to add logistically, how do I get liquid to the field? How do I tend it? The cost associated with it, the labor, the fact that we probably can't carry as much liquid as we can seed. So it slows down our planting windows and our production cycle kind of slows down a little bit. So there's a lot of challenges. Plus there's the complexity of what do I use? So once I conquer those things, then I have, how do I get it into the ground in the right place? So we think through this battle that the farmers have in the springtime with all the pressures and stress that add to what's already a complicated thing, then we add liquid to it. And there's some heavy resistance and we get it. I always remember a farmer telling me one time that if in the springtime, if he needed to make more money, he'd go deliver pizzas on the weekend. But in the springtime, he doesn't need more money necessarily. I mean, I think they all need more money, but he needed time. The commodity of time was critical to his operation. So the complexity that kind of comes into it is a real barrier for a farmer. Even though we'll share some statistics later that, conquering that mindset and figuring out a way to do something complicated in that spring pass with the planter is going to have some huge dividends as far as revenue and yield and grain in the tank at the end of the day.
So, Matt, you make some great points because I think primarily it's the time and not only the seed, like you mentioned, but dealing with starter or some kind of infra or a combination thereof at planting. But I think about, in particular when I think about starter fertilizer, I'm thinking about nitrogen and phosphorus specifically, and whether it's nitrogen only or a combination of 1034O, a very popular product that we see used as a starter. But I think you got to think about too, if getting those placed accurately. And I think the planting operation, though it's challenging with the time, gives you that opportunity to get them placed relative to that seed with various options. I think we're going to talk a little bit more about that later. One thing I think is a challenge too today that goes beyond the farm is the public, and in particular, considering some of the environmental concerns today that surround nitrogen in many states. Here in Ohio, we talk a little bit more about phosphorus, but at the end of the day, they're together, they're connected. And when we think about environmental concerns, especially here in Ohio, one of the primary best management practices is subsurface placement of fertilizers, and the planter provides that opportunity. It's not only planting and placing seed, but it gives us an option in the same pass, and I think as efficiently as possible to place fertilizer within that operation.
I don't think you could add any more of a perfect scenario to what you just brought up, because when we think about the water management, future legislation, things like that, I really think that we got to conquer the hurdle, because if we think about runoff and phosphorus and nitrogen entering into the waterway and into the end of that whole conversation. I don't want to go too deep into it, but the idea is if we can apply less and do it more often, we're more likely to not have runoff and seepage and some of those factors that come into it. So it really is a great motivational thing for a farmer that probably knows it's the best thing, might be forced to do it a little bit differently than he's done it in the past. It's probably a good idea to get involved and start learning, taking baby steps to figure out how to do an application of nitrogen with a planter, because everyone's going to agree it's so much better to put 50 pounds on 3 times than to put 150 in one chunk. And I think that there's going to be some major factors that come to us that the world we can't predict, but I think we can predict that more regulation is coming at some point. It's sad to admit, but that will add complexity that the American farmer, the Ohio farmer, is going to have to deal with.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more with you guys. You both made some great points. You know, there's a lot of obstacles doing this. You know, time, logistics, what's the right mix? How can I work this into my rotation? So a lot of considerations, but you know, what's the advantages to it? Why should somebody consider, you know, setting this planter up to be able to put fertilizer on?
Yeah, the overall question of why should we consider fertilizer on the planter pass? There's all these negatives we just talked about, you know, the right product and how do I apply it? And there's several different ways to apply it. And I think the idea that we have to come up to is that if I can figure out a way to take a little bit of phosphorus, a little bit of nitrogen, whatever that application is, and move that from a fall to a springtime application. And we think about placement. So one of the things that does happen is someone will make the step, like I have 2x2. All right. Now there's a whole conversation that we probably could have evolved. What does 2x2 mean? What's pop-up? What's starter? Where do all these things? And there is some mass confusion there that we probably need to clarify at some point, or have that right conversation. But when we talk about a planter, there's really 2 products that you're going to try to put on. Mostly it's going to be nitrogen and phosphorus. Now that doesn't mean that there's not going to be some of the others, some of the micros and some of those other things that go in there. But when we talk about feeding a plant, well, a common occurrence that we'll see is that someone is equipped with a coulter system that's intended to do 2 inches to the right of the furrow and 2 inches below. Now, let's be honest, this is Ohio. How many people are putting 2 inches below the furrow? We can have that conversation. So 2x2 probably doesn't mean really 2x2. But the idea is that is an ideal placement for nitrogen. That is not an ideal application location for phosphorus. And the reason I want to have this conversation is that nitrogen and phosphorus are completely different in many different ways. Nitrogen is once it's handed off and it's on its own, it's needed. So it's more like a V4 and on product, and it's critical. Phosphorus is an early stage. It promotes cell elongation, and that plant needs that phosphorus to be available at V2 and on. And the other big difference, and there's several, but nitrogen is a mass flow. So when your plant respirates and it pulls up, it drinks, nitrogen goes with the water. Phosphorus doesn't work that way. Phosphorus is a near root diffusion. And if I tell you that I need phosphorus at V2 and your root ball is about that big, I can't have phosphorus 2 inches away and have it the intended purpose. Sure, the plant will probably get to it at some point and it'll use it a little bit, but it's not at that critical stage that it's needed for maximum yield. So we need to move phosphorus closer. The other thing is phosphorus can be close to a seed where nitrogen is deadly. If I get seed burn, I get too much, I get it too close, I will turn and have an adverse effect to that plant. So we think through those, and that's kind of the mindset we have to have, is understanding ideal placement for what I'm trying to put on, and that because there's an ideal placement, you can very easily put the wrong thing in the wrong spot. And so that's a part of this fertilization and doing that on a planter, especially near seed. It's a major concern, and we need to understand those differences, and that there's both fertilizers, both do great things, but they're needed at different times, and they have completely different entry paths to our plant system.
And in particular, corn is a lot of times what we're talking about when we're thinking about starter on the planter, Matt. I think I would add to, why should we consider? I mean, that's our question here is, I just look at the last, 5 years. We could expand that to 10 years and look at the advancements in technology and controls and sensors that we've made within the industry that can be placed on the planter. My point in that is I think it's a lot simpler today to talk and have a discussion around putting in furrow on a planter today, than it was, 10 plus years ago. And in
Right.
particular, 20, 25 years ago, I mean, we could do it. It worked, but we can do it a lot more simpler. And I want to also make the comment that we can meter it much more accurately and precisely than we've ever had in the past. And so I think about two things. Why do it? Number one is it's a lot simpler today, and I think there's an advantage to the point you're making, Matt. Get that fertilizer right there. So whether the roots, that plant as it grows and develops, intersects both the phosphorus and nitrogen, I think there's an efficiency aspect to that over time we can talk about. We won't go into all details about that, but I think in time we'll find that we could probably uh, think about what the exact rate should be in that area. The second thing I think is that when I think about just movement and potential loss of the system, placing nutrients at planting or in the growing season is just going to give us an advantage, not only from the efficiency, like I mentioned, but that environmental concerns that the public constantly kind of beating us up about. But if we can have that done, that the planter and then anything thereafter, we talk about split applications, the advantages those give, but doing it with the planter and then coming back and doing like a side dress or some kind of mid or late season, there's just a real advantage to that, both in efficiency and environmentally.
Yeah, that's a really good call out because you kind of sit here and think about it for a minute. If I'm a grower and I experienced the challenges of liquids 20 years ago, there's probably, if we're honest about it, there's probably some guys that are going to listen to this that, hey, I've been there, done that, and I ain't going back. The fact that it's gotten so much easier, row by row, the shutoffs, that's just what I would call table stakes at this point. Knowing what's happening, a lot of guys' exposure to liquid is a ball floating in a clear tube that they can't see that's 30 feet away. We're way past that now. There's sensors on the market now that don't require filtration, or much different filtration. The plugging issue, that's kind of the new dawn that we're in with liquid, because we found so much yield that companies have been forced to adapt and come up with a way that we kind of change that learning curve completely. I mean, anyone that's been in any of these classes at Ohio State wishes there was a curve, right? Well, that curve, the good news is the curve has gotten a lot simpler in 2020 than it was in 2000. And I can't imagine how hard it was to do in the 80s. So, it's something to talk about, because I think that, I've been burned on that. I struggled through that. I've adapted my operation to not have to deal with it on the planter, and I'm giving up yield. I say this over and over again, that modern farming today is the act of giving up yield for convenience. I know it's hurtful to say, it's painful to hear, but the reality is there are things that we do because that's what our operation can withstand, as opposed to what's the right thing for maximizing yield and, at the end of the day, ROI. And I think that's one of those. So I do think if someone is, I guess my message would be, if someone has experienced liquid in the past and dealt with all the headaches that comes with it, it's kind of a new day. I would definitely be interested, or definitely need to do a little research and find out what's available now and how that's different and what the improvements are.
So with that said, Matt, let's make sure, I think there's been a lot of good points, but a couple things that I want to make sure. Split applications pay. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely.
And in this kind of mindset, if we can start to transition our mindset that we need to be thinking about fertilizer placement, and the planter's not the only thing, but that's what we're talking about today. But thinking about taking the opportunity in that pass of placing nitrogen and doing it very accurately relative to where we're placing the seed, whether it's in nitrogen or phosphorus. but that can be an advantage to our operation. But those things in combination, split applications, by thinking about the planter as one of the opportunities, especially with some nitrogen and phosphorus, these are real value. Is that?
Oh, absolutely.
So, well, I'll tell you, let's, I guess let's share some information. I mean, this is recent, and I know for us, this is kind of we'll say hot off the press, and for Matt, it's going to be the same. And
Yeah.
there's a lot more, right? And we're just not we didn't selectively just choose these because they're flowing along with these comments we're making, but I think we're saying these because these are repeated over years, and this is consistently what we've been able to see. I'm going to just kick things off and talk a little quickly about it, and I want to say thanks to Nate Doritas at the Farm Science Review. We set out, about a year ago and got to talking about something like this. And we just were thinking about, if I'm given X amount of nitrogen, I mean, and we think ahead, that may be someday that's coming. You're only given such amount of nitrogen to use. And we're here sitting here in our corn crop. Does timing begin to matter? And if so, what are some strategies to start wrapping our head around? And again, this is an on-farm research project that Nate and I went through and designed. It's replicated. This is July 11th RGB or visible image in this field. You can see some strips. You can see some variation across this field too. We haven't had quite the time here this winter to break out the variable rate kind of things that we want to look into, but it does show that, some things were happening out there, and we expected to see some yield differences. Very simply, for the setup in this, we're given 170 pounds of nitrogen. Okay, 170 pounds. Nate and I determined this with some outer support, just using the MRTN tool that's housed at Iowa State. That's one of them out there. And we just said, for this field, these conditions, what was the economic optimum application rate for nitrogen for corn in 2020? And it said 170. And so that was our given amount of nitrogen. We took that and broke it out into several scenarios. We left some strips out there with no nitrogen. We wanted to learn. That's part of it. If we didn't do that, we wouldn't know, what's going on. And then, the balance of that 170 going down through here is, hey, we put 170 pounds on right up front with the planter. I want to make a note of that here in a second. And then the rest of that was split at different rates on the planter. Nate was using a 2x2 setup, and then we're ultimately coming back as side dress, okay, and doing the balance of what was not applied at planting. And then, but I did want to note on this planter only full rate, and going to that discussion, Matt, we were talking about this new technology and simpler. I mean, when was it back in the day? You would think maybe 20, 30 gallons. Or I'm just going to have to make a major change on even pumps and stuff to make, 170 pounds work out there. And today, same system, going to the point as a PWM type style system. We could go again from 0 to over 170 pounds of in and applied with that planter pass at essentially the same, rough planting speed. I'll say 5 miles an hour. I don't remember exactly what he'd put in. Was driving in this field, but my point is the new technology gives us a lot of options on how much to apply out there with these new technologies. So I think the point to all this is coming over here to the yield. Of course, we expected that a little bit of concern with just doing it all side dress, if not the planter only. But you see here, we nominally on average across that field was 73 bushels an acre in corn. Not surprising. I would characterize this field as getting off to a great start. Had a good spring. Nate got it in timely, got off to a great start. We started to see some treatment differences at the V5, V6 stage when we were back out there doing some sampling. But then it did turn dry in July and August. This corn struggled through some stress, in particular water stress late in the season. And so with that, though, we still made out pretty decent. The split applications here definitely of 30 pounds, 50 pounds up front, even 170 pounds up front. You can see all these to some relative degree No statistical difference here. With the 30 pounds up front, with 140 pounds delivered side dress, definitely providing us the maximum yield, though there wasn't any difference between this one and the 50-120 split or the 170 up front. But in general, what you can see is putting on full rate. I think there's some loss if we consider just doing it only at side dress. The story that I tell from this, and this is 1 year for Nate doing this, is we need some nitrogen out there, and then coming out and putting a balance in a stressful year like this. Getting 30 out was more than sufficient to get us through that V5 stage. Putting a remainder out there just gave us an opportunity to maintain what is the yield given the growing conditions. We do see the planter maintain, relative to these others, about about a 4 bushel difference between this and the other one. But again, it does show that there's the trend is getting some out with the planter followed by some kind of balance definitely gave us some advantage out there. So I'll just put a note in this full report. A lot more details about this results will be in our 2020 version of our report that'll come out, that's out there. So please see the results on that. So Matt, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Well, I think that I have some studies from our Pontiac farm. So this would be a precision planting farm in Pontiac, Illinois, where our agronomists and basically staff go out and put a crop, and they really, I think there's over 200 studies out there this year throughout all that acreage. And what I am sharing with you is basically nitrogen management study that was taken to yield, and the idea behind it is you've got a set amount, so it's more of there are some where we over applied, but most of the time we kept the same amount of nitrogen, just split it up. And what you'll see is the chart's pretty easy to read. Of course, you have your highest yield on the left, your lowest yield on the right. The lowest yield was a 100% weed and feed fall application of nitrogen, and then we start splitting it up. So conceal, where you see conceal, that is our side-by-side or gauge wheel mounted nitrogen application tool that puts the nitrogen 3 inches by 1 inch. So 3 inches to the right or left and 1 inch down. And then there's some dual band in there where we did it on both sides. But the point that I'm trying to make is that there are some big benefits to running a split application. So if you think about it, if we go from right to left, the easiest thing to probably do is 100% weed and feed, right? You might not even do that. You might have your local co-op provider come out and do that in the fall. When we go to the left side, when you see these split applications really starting to shine and some big yield differences coming in, especially over what we would consider a baseline if you are a 100% weed and feed grower, that there's a lot of yield. Now, the 233, that is a 25% additional nitrogen, but everything else I think you'll see is going to equal that 100%. With the blue in the center, that 221 being weed and feed, and so a fall application, and then a 50% side dress. So that would be a non-planter pass, what we've got there. Then you have just planter passes and then the mix. So if we go to the next slide, we can kind of draw out that there's some real advantages as far as ROI. So we actually move our top yielding because we increased our nitrogen. It doesn't necessarily return the best. So it was $24. It was still a great return, almost $25. But you can see right there a 25% weed and feed. So it's the same practice you've always done. I reallocate those funds from a fall application and move those to a spring application of 25%, and then still have that 50% to feed in season at that right pass. It's probably the hardest thing to do. I just did 3 things. But if you look, there's really not a way to push top end yield like this without having some type of application of nitrogen on the planter pass. And that's what we wanted to say. So what this is the ROI. So it's pretty interesting data. This data, like John had mentioned, their stuff is going to be available in their e-files. This is going to be available to the public through our precision planning website. website. So it's just our Pontiac results. So I think it's key to kind of share that a little bit, because boy, there's a lot of reasons to not use a planter to put on fertilizer. And until you start and look at this a little bit, then it kind of hurts a little bit. There's probably a need that we need to figure out the right way to get about this.
Just looking at some of your data there, Matt, you said you're still the hardest ones, 25% weed and feed, 25% concealed, 25 or 50% side dress. Yeah, you're gonna be able to spread fertilizer faster in the fall. So if the window is smaller, you're on less versus that 100%. Your planter pass is not going to change. You're still do that because you're planting your seeds. So really, it's that side dress, and then that's a pretty quick pass during a good time of the year as well. Get out, do some scouting while you're doing it. So there's benefits to incorporating a system like that versus just seeing that return on investment increasing.
I agree. And I think that if we're honest, the side dress pass is probably going to be something that the very high percentage of people are doing. Very, very
right.
high.
So you guys have kind of outlined there's challenges getting things done in the spring. You have a smaller window. So trying to kind of incorporate things the best possible. So we're looking at planter on the fertilizer or fertilizer on the planter and how we can make that pass most beneficial. So incorporating both of those ideas, we got a smaller window. What's the consideration? So now it's colder, maybe soil temperatures, or it's a little bit wetter. You're trying to decide if I'm going to plant or not. Well, now I have fertilizer on this planter. Now you've got to worry about fertilizer got to be placed right, seeds got to be placed right, soil conditions, what kind of furrow conditions, what's that going to play a role? Because now it's going to be considering both your fertilizer and your seed, not just that seed when you're planting.
Yeah, I think that's a great kind of lead into that conversation. So I've done everything right. I've got fertilizer on the planter now. It's not an easy button, unfortunately. Furrow conditions, ground conditions when you plant, for anyone that's trying to grow and optimize a crop, you got to get that right. It does not alleviate mistakes. You still have to get the conditions right. I still have to be in a situation where I plant into moisture, but not too much moisture, and that I can actually close and seal my fertilizer as well as the seed trench. Seed to soil contact is going to be king. So, anything that we do that reduces stand count, because that's a reduced stand count is a reduced ear count, which I can't overcome. There's nothing I can do. We always tell people that, there's nothing you can do to add yield to a corn crop once the planter pass is done. The only thing I can do is hold on to it. So we've got to get that right. And that's a good practice. So as always, and you thought maybe you were going to get someone from Precision Planting to not talk about this, but we've got to get the furrow right. We've got to get out and we've got to dig. We've got to make sure that our soil conditions are right. We're creating that great environment to start that seed's life. And frankly, I think it starts, if you're not doing that if this is what you watch and somebody says, digging's that important and getting it right. Yes. That if that's the only thing you change from this conversation, or the only thing you after this conversation, we did some good today.
Yeah, I think I'm going to add to that point, and what Matt was really alluding to about digging. I think about seed depth placement, and we've done a little over 6 years of work on that. And no matter what I do on the fertilizer side, if I don't get my depth correct, and I'm not talking about variable rate seeding depth like we may move into in the future, but I'm talking about today of getting it placed in moisture and giving that seed an opportunity to hit that 30% mark to start the real process and all this. I'm really not gaining much in my book. But we've learned this year, and Matt, we've talked a little bit about this, but the consistency of depth, making sure not only you're digging, But if you do have some sensors that give you feedback, that I think those will be very enlightening in terms of where you're placing seed and ensuring that you're getting it placed correctly and at a depth. We had a scenario with one of our cooperators this spring, and actually a couple others that I rode with did the same thing, but they were using your product. I'm not here advocating it. I'm just telling you, it gave us new insights that we kind of used the prior year's setup for seeding depth on corn, but found out quickly because of the conditions this spring, we had to make a little different adjustment to those. And we had even dug and thought we were, 2 inches and planted a little bit more, and we got back out of the cab and dug a little bit more and actually made some, quarter to half inch adjustments as it relates to what's in the manual to the planter, and we got ourselves back to where we felt very comfortable. And the result of that was, based on going back out and doing some emergence counts, I feel like we were a lot more uniform on our emergence when we looked at plant stands. And it really is a contributor to spending some time making sure for that field and those conditions, especially considering that even in the fields that we were working in, it's not uniform. We got soil texture, we got terrain variability out there, but for the best we could, we chose a setup that got us to put it at 2 inches, and we did it consistently, regardless of if it was a little bit wetter or a little bit drier as we moved across that field, and that got us off to a great start. My opinion on that too is that you get a good root structure going in that scenario too. You minimize competition, things like that, especially when we were thinking about some of the seeding rates we were using for some of these higher yielding areas. And there's a real advantage to that. And I think about efficiency. We keep talking about fertilizer. If we get that plant off to the best start it can, it's going to be the most efficient over time, over the growing season, versus the plant that we got off to maybe a little bad start because we didn't get it placed at 2 inches. Maybe we only got it. We've even seen where we thought we were doing 2 inches, and I can show you results that we were only at 1.3, 1.2 inches, basically an inch and a quarter. That's a 75-inch, difference of where we thought we were, but where we ended up. And so there's a lot of value, and to me, about getting your depth right, and that plays into this whole discussion around fertilizer.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Especially, like we said, that it's a common practice that we're equipped one way to put liquid on instead of equipping 2 ways to put liquid on and get the right liquid in the right place or the right fertilizer in the right place. Sometimes we cheat. Sometimes we might be putting nitrogen on the seed or very near, and if you don't have that depth right, and that's just a function of just not understanding the planter. So I'm with you on that. Take the time to make sure that planter is calibrated, and that when you set that lever on that depth control, that it's there. Better yet, get a way to know exactly where every row is when you plant.
Yeah, and you guys repeatedly told us, it's planting season and the operation is so important, and there's so many things that can go right or wrong, and so many considerations to make and decisions to decide. I'm convinced, I need to put fertilizer on my planter. I want to make this jump. So what's out there? What technology is available for me not only place fertilizer accurately, but also meter out the right amount or get that right mix that I need in the furrow?
Yeah. So I think the easiest way to answer this question is you should plant the same speed at the same population across all your acres, and then we just made liquid simple. Nobody's going to do that, right? That's ridiculous, right? We have different fields that require different different populations to maximize yield. So for someone that is experienced liquid in the past, that's not experienced new technology and what's changed, we have several different people. Not just I'm representing Precision Planting here today, but row by row control that meters accurately to, we're talking within, a tenth of a gallon across all your acres. The ability to go any speed and not have to stop and change an orifice. I mean, when we started dealing with this a few years ago and we got rid of orifices, people really looked at it like we took a major learning curve out. So, there's there's application products that can place the fertilizer for phosphorus, for example, near the seed without burning. And then the nitrogen application move further away. It's not uncommon for people to put 60 gallons on of nitrogen and do that much. That's a very common practice. Is the modern pump technology and the way that we can understand the flow and the dynamics of the fluid going through at different temperatures, different rates, different adjustments. That's kind of a hurdle that we've conquered as an industry, and has really moved us forward to where the simplicity is there. So I think that when we watch what we're able to do, as far as not just talking about people that break yield records every year, but just, farms that have really made those next steps forward in profitability, it's conquering some of this and understanding that it's not quite as hard as what it used to be. When you change just one function, speed, that's a headache for anyone putting liquid on. Is in the temperature control, the flowability. I mean, we have sensors on the market today that you can run a very dense, lumpy liquid through, for lack of a better term, without plugging. And that didn't exist 2 years ago. So it's fantastic the way technology has moved forward. And now we've just lessened that curve to get more people involved. And honestly, it doesn't slow down the planning process as much, because we just eliminated a lot of that hassle that a lot of people had to put up with.
Well, I guess I would probably add two things, Matt, is select the technology that works best for your system. And one of the primary things, I was just dealing with a grower today, asking some questions about fertilizer delivery is, I think you got to ask questions, think about your operation, thinking about what you're trying to accomplish, break out the phosphorus and nitrogen separately and think about that and what you're trying to accomplish. If you are bringing it onto the planter, what you're doing. But we think about, and we've talked about this, Matt, all these different options, whether it's going back to the basic 2x2, which has been around for years, to add some of these newer technologies that companies like you and Yetter and others are providing as options. But using what works best for you. If it's just starting out, maybe 2x2 is your thing, just to kind of get some nitrogen out and get. But for us, I can tell you that thinking through doing some in-furrow placement by some kind of 2x2 or similar type. I think you called it 3x1 on your conceal type strategy. Hey, getting some nitrogen and phosphorus placed out there. There's a lot of different technologies. My second part about that is, beyond just asking questions and doing your homework, seeing who's local to help you out in terms of installation and supporting you, and you hit the nail on the head. The next step, we got the sensors to validate what's actually happening on the go. And such an important aspect. When I think about the planter operation and the actual, not only setting yield, but the amount of money that we're putting out there in a per second, per minute, however you want to do your math, per hour type, I want to make sure that whether it's 10 o'clock in the morning, 8 o'clock, or afternoon, whether it's fertilizer or seed, I want to make sure I'm getting it done right from the start to the end of the day, and from the start of the season to the end of the season. And with all these sensors, I know they cost a little bit of money, but in terms of validating what's going on the go, and giving us the confidence that we're doing it right and as planned, we talked about this, as planned, then there's a tremendous value in that. Not only just to have a map, but have that feedback to the operator that hey, I'm getting 36,000 corn seeds, and I'm putting 5 gallons in furrow, and I'm putting 15 gallons with a 2x2 or similar type strategy. I want to know that that's being done right, because again, thinking about not only setting yield, but giving us the opportunity to do as we plan to do out there in the field.
Well said. I think the goal for everyone should be, we want to eliminate streaky corn. Wouldn't that be amazing? And unfortunately, I'm sorry if it's one of the guys on here and it's like, you've had streaky corn. It's real easy to have something plug up and you have no idea in the cab. And the only time you notice it is when you stop and you realize, well, there should be dribble marks behind these rows. We're just way past that. You know, liquid control now, you know, everyone's experienced with seating control, the ability to change speed without changing, you know, sprockets and, you know, a variable rating, and that's liquid control has matched what seating is. So it's clutching on and off. It's doing a different prescription for one row than it is for other rows. That technology is out there now. And, you know, that would be the big thing, is that you don't want to experience the streaky corn. So I think if we could eliminate that, we all win.
Yeah. And I want to throw one more note before we end today is one of the real enabling pieces to all this has been PWM, or what we call pulse width modulation. As we look at the advancements over the years of going from ball valves to different styles of valves to today, we're talking about PWM technology. When you look at that, what Matt's talking about row by row, or very quicker control, quicker response control. It's really been PWM technology that has really advanced us to being able to do some of the things that we can do today, whether it's changing rates instantly or doing something on a row by row kind of basis.
Mm-hmm.
So I just want to take a moment here and thank our presenters today, Matt Bennett with Precision Planning and Dr. John Fulton with the Ohio State University, for taking time to go over some of their latest research with us and some of their corporations of fertilizer on the planner. So thank you again, guys, for being here today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate everyone that takes time to watch it. I hope it was helpful. And thank you to Ohio State University for, frankly, caring enough to put this together. And I really appreciate all you guys are doing. And I'm just flattered to be a part of it. And beyond, you know, on behalf of everyone at Precision Planning, myself, thank you to all you growers that took time to be a part of this.
Yeah, thanks for everyone joining. Will, thanks for driving us through some good questions, and hopefully it was beneficial. And Matt, we appreciate your, you being here. We know you're busy, so greatly appreciate you could come and share with us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you, guys.
Next week, we're going to have Dr. Mark Loux and Dr. Scott Shearer kind of doing a back and forth on preseason crop protection. Dr. Mark Loux is our weed specialist, and Dr. Shearer is the chair of our Food, Ag, and Biological Engineering department. So that'll be a really interesting discussion. And then we're bringing in Dr. Joe Luck from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln to talk about sprayer technology. And if you've attended Precision University in the past, you may remember him from a couple years ago, a really great speaker. So looking forward to that.
Sentinel, the industry-leading liquid row monitor from Surefire Ag, eliminates costly mistakes that could subtract revenue from your bottom line. Sentinel utilizes your existing in-cab display to provide instant notification of flow variances and row blockages. Sentinel is the smart choice that pays for itself. Quick Draw drives sprayer productivity. Surefire Ag's automated spray tender system can meter, mix, and load a 1,000-gallon batch in just 8 minutes. Less time loading means more acres sprayed. Quick Draw from Surefire Ag, driving sprayer productivity. Learn more at surefireag.com.